And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook. It is Tuesday, July 2nd, and this outlook will be for Wednesday and Thursday, including the 4th of July there on Thursday. But looking first at the sea ice at this point, this far along in the summer, we have quite a bit of open water now in the lower Chukchi Sea in the areas between Cape Lisburne and Point Ley, though there still is a fair amount of ice along, especially the central eastern Arctic coastline east there of Utqiagvik to Kaktovik. And again, just a slow melt-off will continue as we go through July and into the month of August. But of note, looking at the weather map, there is a weak cold front. It's not especially strong, but it does have some cooler air behind it across the Chukchi Sea and Arctic Ocean coming in out of eastern Russia. This feature will push southeastward and then just kind of wash out. More importantly, though, there is quite a feed of warmer, moist air coming in out of the North Pacific across the Bering Sea, and that'll eventually work its way inland across the mainland, especially up through the interior between the Alaska Range and Brooks Range, and it's going to provide soaking rains. Some areas will end up getting well over a couple inches of rainfall as we go through the length of the long holiday weekend by the time we get into Sunday or Monday of next week. Weak low pressure will remain southwest of the Gulf in the North Pacific here through midweek. And on the 4th of July, Thursday, we anticipate the rains to be spreading further eastward out toward Fairbanks and the Alcan border, and another reinforcing push of this moisture coming in off the Bering along the southwest and western coast. So this will keep the rain going for some time. It'll be in the form of showers and or areas of steadier rain. And even in the Anchorage area, we do anticipate some steadier rains by the time we get into Friday night and into much of the day on Saturday. Could be as much as a half to maybe over 3/4 of an inch of rainfall with that system here by the time it lets up later in the day Saturday. But looking at the marine forecast, winds will be northwest 10 to 15 knots there, Petersburg down through Ketchikan, Metlakatla. As we go to the north, Lynn Canal, south winds 15 knots, 3-foot waves. The outer coast, generally west-northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. Swells running right around 4 or 5 feet. And then Thursday, we anticipate winds in the inner channels. South winds 15 knots, Lynn Canal. Southwest winds 15 knots, Stevens Passage. And then northwest winds 15 knots there coming down out toward Dixon Entrance. And along the outer coastline in the nearshore waters, Sitka down through Craig, northwest to west winds 10 to 15 knots, generally westerly winds there outside of Yakutat Bay with waves running a few feet. Along the northwestern Gulf, we expect variable winds only around 10 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance and off the Kenai coast. Within Prince William Sound, generally southwest winds 10 knots, waves 2 feet. And then down along the Cook Inlet, southeast winds at the entrance 15 knots, but south to southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, especially off of Anchor Point. Swells anywhere from 3 to as high as 5 feet. And then for Thursday, generally southwesterly flow across the northwestern Gulf at 15 knots, southerly winds to 10 knots within Prince William Sound, and Cook Inlet's looking at southwest winds as high as 25 knots there just off of Anchor Point with waves as high as 6 to 7 feet. Around Shelikof, straight down toward the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, winds will generally be variable at 10 knots. And 10-knot winds variable there on the north side, on the Bering side, but look for generally westerly winds there within Bristol Bay. Waves running, though, only a couple of feet tops. And then for Thursday, southwest winds across Kodiak Island, 15 to 20 knots. Swells 3, maybe as high as 4 or 5 feet here in Shelikof Strait. Variable winds off at Chiknik and Sand Point, as well as there in the central portion of the peninsula on the North Pacific side, but southwest winds generally 10 to 15 knots. And across the Aleutians, variable winds rather light, only around 10 knots, the far eastern Aleutians around Dutch Harbor. But once you get through the central Aleutians back toward the western Aleutians, Atka westward through Adak, Kiska, and Shemya, south winds 25 to 30 knots for Wednesday. And then on Thursday, we expect southwest winds over the central and eastern Aleutians at 15 knots, but once you get west of Adak, still southerly winds running about 20 to 25 knots. And along The southwest coast, west wind, Bristol Bay 15 knots, southwest wind into Kuskokwim Bay at 20 knots, south winds along the Pribilovs at 25 knots with waves of 6-7 feet. And then off and along the lower Yukon Delta into Norton Sound, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots with swells there of 5 to 7 feet. And the brisker 25 knot southwest winds continue there along the YK Delta into Norton Sound for the day Thursday for the 4th of July. And even southwest winds 25 knots into Kuskokwim Bay, southwest winds of 15 knots into Bristol Bay. And as we get back towards St. Matthew, St. Paul, winds will be southwesterly around 20 knots with swells there of 6 to 8 feet. Through the Bering Strait, winds will be southwesterly 25 knots. As we come up along the northwest coast outside there, Point Hope, Cape Lisburn, could be as high as south to southwest winds 20 to 30 knots all the way up to Utqiagvik, and even here along the Arctic coastline east of Utqiagvik, we're looking at southwest to west winds at 25 knots. They'll come down a little bit here Thursday, 4th of July, westerly winds along the Arctic coast at 20 knots. Generally south winds right around 20 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea, and as we extend down through the Bering Strait, we look at winds generally out of the south-southwest at 20 knots.